Def Leppard tweaks their sound for their third album, and it pays huge dividends on the charts and on MTV. The album is Pyromania. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff. And Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. If you're new to this podcast and you don't know what 3324 means, you're going to have to find whatever episode it was, Eric, that we mentioned it. We don't mention it very often. We have, but you're going to have to, you know what? There's the challenge is you got to listen to our back catalog to find out the definition.
That is a challenge.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a challenge.
I think our audience is on the ball, and I think they could figure it out. Little thinking, and you'll get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier than today's Wordle. Say that much.
Okay.
How's it going, Eric? How's things?
It's good. Everything's good. Yeah.
Good to go.
Here we are again.
Here we are again. Feels like I just saw you a couple days ago.
Yeah, right. And another little mini reunion of sorts. We have another special guest with us tonight. Our good friend Rob Prisament is here with us.
Yes.
Hi there, everybody.
Yeah.
Always
great
great
to be with you again.
Yes. Last time, Rob was last seen on our guitar solos album. Top 5 guitar solos episode.
That's right.
I keep saying album.
Did we?
like we're putting out albums, you know?
Right?
On our greatest hits album, we have.
Yeah. They're episodes. They're not albums, Dean. Get it through your head. But it's always great when Rob is on. Rob is a wealth of musical knowledge. So it's always fun when he brings his talents to bear on one of our episodes, and it's always a pleasure. And when we were talking, when we wanted to do Pyromania, I'm like, there's only really one person I think that's going to really be able to bring it, and it was Rob. And I said, Rob, Pyromania, and he's like, yes.
That was a big part of high school.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So let's do the stats, and then we'll talk about that, because I think that this album, it really kind of harkens back to a particular point in all of our lives. Since we're the same age, we went to the same school and grew up in the same town.
Mm-hmm.
And knew each other too.
And knew each other. We checked off all the important boxes. He's not just a stranger that walked in and says, "Hey, I'm going to do a podcast episode."
Right.
He's got the background. So this was released in Pyromania by Def Leppard, released in January of 1983. The songs are written by Def Leppard, different kind of members from Def Leppard, and Mutt Lange. And it was also produced by Mutt Lange. There were 4 singles that were released. Photograph hit number 13. Rock of Ages hit number 16. Foolin' hit number 28. Too Late for Love was on the rock charts, but didn't chart on the Billboard Top 100 or 200 that we talk about. Hit number 2 on the Billboard album charts. And this one's a monster. 10 times platinum. So that's over 10 million copies sold. So this is another big one. Let's see. The lineup at the time was Joe Elliott on vocals, Steve Clark on guitar and backing vocals, Rick Savage on bass, Rick Allen on drums, Pete Willis, who was on rhythm guitar, was an original member. He kind of got sacked partway through the recording of this album. They all drank, but his was just out of control and having a negative impact. So then they brought in another guitarist, Phil Collen, not to be confused with Phil Collins. Phil Collen wears no shirt when he plays. Now that's his new trademark, is Phil Collen has to be on stage without a shirt because he's so ripped and cut. I don't think Phil Collins used to do that too a little bit. He used to kind of go shirtless, but he was all kind of sweaty. Phil Collen is like playing guitar, so it's a little sexier. That's the lineup. Pete Willis was an original member, was asked to vacate the premises. They brought in Phil Collen. That would carry them through until the death of Steve Clark a few years later. And then Vivian Campbell would come in. And then it's pretty much been pretty much been a stable lineup, Rob, right?
Yeah.
Did I got that chronology? Did I?
Yes, you did.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, they not a lot of, they replace people as needed, but they don't have people coming and going. It's not a revolving door of members. Pretty much people stay, and that's one of the things about Def Leppard.
So Pete Willis was involved in writing some of the songs on this album. His input is definitely felt.
Yeah, and then Phil Collin, Phil Collin even said, he goes, I had the easiest job, because most of the the backing tracks were done. He said, I just had to come in and put the solos down. So I just kind of got to come in. The heavy lifting was done. I kind of came in, ripped into the solos, laid them down, and got it done. So let's talk about this. So January of 1983. So all of us were still in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when this came out. It was a pretty significant event, I think, for rock music, whether you cared for the album or not. And we'll get into some of that as well. But Rob, you were saying, it brings you right back.
I was saying my friends and I were big fans of the band already from the previous two albums. So this coming out was, oh my gosh, I can't wait to buy it, and ran out and bought it as soon as it came out, and absolutely loved it. We all went to see them at Nassau Coliseum, opening up for Billy Squier a few months later. Yes.
Fortunes would turn for
That's
Billy
amazing.
Squier.
And I'm not proud.
How was Squier? Was he good?
Oh yeah, he was really good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think he deserves an overview episode, Billy Squier, but I digress.
He deserves like a commercial break.
Come on, he had a lot of good songs, man. Come on, don't do him that dirty.
Wow.
At the time, Squier was the shit. In the early 80s, like Squier was like, was the man. I'm sorry, we're going on already off on a tangent, but
And
anyway.
To be fully honest, I was such a fanboy and a malleable teen at the age that I had a Union Jack cut off shirt and fake leather pants. And I only remember wearing them together once, but it was not a good picture.
Was that in school? Did we ever see you in that garb in school?
No.
In the hallways? No.
Was it to the show? So. You wore it to the show, or you just wore it at a party?
I wore it at a party once.
Yeah.
Okay.
One and done.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what? In 1983, you were self-aware enough to say this ensemble doesn't work for me. Joe Elliott can pull it off. Not everybody can.
Oh, and my friends let me know.
Oh, okay. Listen, Rob, this ain't working.
Yeah.
No uncertain terms. Yeah.
This was what I remember most about this album, and the Union Jack cutoff T-shirt that Joe Elliott wore, because I would come home from school every day and try and get some MTV time in before my mother got to her next soap or whatever. And almost like clockwork, by the time I would get home, Photograph would be playing on MTV almost every day, almost at the same time, many times throughout the day. But Photograph, it felt like I would come home from school, and if I got some MTV time, I would inevitably see Photograph, the video.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was, these guys were one of the big benefactors. They really cashed in on MTV because it was early. 83 was still the early days of of MTV. Plus their previous album, High and Dry, had Bringing on the Heartbreak, which was a video that MTV was able to kind of grab again, that, they were looking for material. So I was like, okay, a minor hit for Def Leppard. But then when Pyromania comes out, it just seems like they almost seem like two different bands, Rob. And I think we need to talk about, part of this conversation is going to be about Mutt Lange. It has to be.
I think a big part of it is going to be.
Yeah.
If I can start off a little bit, there. First of all, I'd like to say I'm very curious about Def Leppard's early years because there are a lot of bands, including Van Halen, including the Beatles, who talk about the thousands of club shows they played before they got their break.
Yeah.
Somehow, in reading the background about Def Leppard, they got together, recorded a 3-song EP with a drummer before Rick Allen, and within a few months, they're opening up for AC/DC and put out their first album and never turned back.
Yeah, 1980 was their first album, right?
Yeah.
80, and then 81 for High and Dry, and then 83.
And their first album is a great AC/DC-ish album and fit right in with all the new wave of heavy metal that was coming out of England, perfectly in the pocket. High and Dry saw Mutt Lange come in, and it was still that hard rock of the 80s, but it was a lot more polished sounding. And the songs were a little more concise, and the lyrics were less about just Led Zeppelin, sex and Vikings and citrus and things like that.
Citrus. Yeah.
And then
How do a Led Zeppelin song? Sex, Vikings, and citrus.
Yes, you have tangerine in the lemon.
Specifically, juice runs down my leg. Of course, yeah.
The Led Zeppelin songwriting kit by Robert Prisament.
Yes. And even though Mutt was there, I think Pyromania really turned into like the gateway album or the gateway drug to what Def Leppard would become.
Mm-hmm.
And one big noticeable thing is that every song on Pyromania is co-written by Mutt Lange. What input he had or what percentage, I don't know. But I'm sure he definitely pushed them a lot in a direction from his experience of being commercial. Mm-hmm. And a big quote that I keep coming back to by Rush is glittering prizes and endless compromises. The integrity, what's it about? And I don't know where Def Leppard's integrity is. Are they a hard rock band that sold out for money, or are they more of a commercial band that was being hard rock because that was the thing at the time?
Yeah. It's a good question.
It's a very valid.
Mutt Lange is going to figure heavily into this, but Mutt Lange, previous to his working with Def Leppard, produced Back in Black, which is the second biggest selling album of all time.
Yeah.
Now Eric has a particular feeling about, I'm going to say, Pyromania and Hysteria, right? Because those two are kind of go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And those and what Robert is talking about is when you mentioned selling out. Pyromania has a certain sound to it. Def Leppard achieved through Mutt Lange a certain sound that no other band replicates, even tries to replicate, and that Mutt Lange doesn't really try and replicate with other artists. It's particular to Def Leppard, is what it is. So I think, so when you're asking the question about did they sell out on this album, I'm not sure. I think they kind of landed on something unique for them, and then leaned into it.
Yes.
I think that, which is, the other albums before that, they could have sounded like every other British hard rock band that was trying to make it.
True. Mm-hmm.
With Pyromania, right, Eric, as much as, whether love it or hate it, there's a particular sound there. The way the backing vocals are, it's well produced, but it's kind of fluffy sounding, meaning everything kind of sounds a little puffed up. But it's strictly theirs, right?
And when you read interviews with the band, they openly say what a huge, huge part Mutt Lange was in that. And if you watch any documentaries on different producers, they can sit and, just twiddle some knobs and say, sounds great. Or they can walk in the room and say, move this chorus over to here, go an octave higher there. Forget that song, it's junk. They can have a huge part in the band's sound. What he did in the studio, I'm not sure, but Def Leppard seems to give him a lot of credit for their success.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling
we just did an episode on the Rolling Stones. Right. And which came out a couple of weeks ago. And we talked about heavily about how the producer was an influence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
About Andrew Watt's influence on the Stones album. Now here we've got an album some 40 years before, right. From 83 with Mutt Lange. So what is you have some certain nitpicks. I'm not going to say I don't think you hate the album. But what is it? What is it about? Like this is it? Would it be fair to say in this case you feel that the producer is too involved?
Maybe I had no idea that it would be this. I guess you could. I suppose you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, bringing them in, they probably whatever he brought, they obviously dug and went with it. And you say leaned into it. I think they leaned very hard into it. Gave it a very unique sound, but to me, the sound of this album is extremely. I never liked it. It's not. It doesn't feel. It never reaches that height of like. I feel like there's people in the room. There's no. I don't think there's any warmth to the album, in my opinion. It's just very processed sounding.
Yep.
Sure. The vocals are just that even sheen over the entire recording. And it just, I don't know what it is. It's just a very even, I like to hear textures in a song. I like to hear, but to me, I can't make anything out when I listen to this album. Even today, I was listening and I was just kind of like trying to pinpoint, rhythm guitar from lead and the vocals. And it's all to me, just on one level. It's as if it's very, to me, dare I say, I don't even know if this is the right word, but to me, it's a very dull sounding effect.
Maybe it's a hard rock wall of sound like Phil Spector.
Well, that's a very good analogy right there. Yeah. I would agree with that. And how I feel about like All Things Must Pass and, albums like that, where he was just, it's a fantastic album song wise. And, all these players in it, but just the sound of that record, it bothers me. Never seemed to be, I don't know. I was just always bothered by the sound of this record. Yeah. I had it. I bought it on cassette. Yeah. Photograph, of course, was the song. MTV really sold me on the song, hearing it on the radio. Right. And perhaps, when you listen to it on the radio has a knack of making it sound just that little bit over the airwaves, that, giving it that punch. But when you actually have it and you're listening to it, I was never impressed with the sound of this album. And if all the credit has to go to Mutt Lange, then I guess I'm not a fan of Mutt Lange.
Again, in this context, because if you go pull up the work that Mutt Lange's done, he's worked with everybody under the sun, but no one else. Rob, I'm going to put this to you, right? No other band sounds like this, like the way this, what was crafted for this band is like I said, it's wholly Def Leppard. It's like there's no other bands tried to copycat them. Kind of like when Motley Crue came out, you had Poison, which was like a second-rate Motley Crue. Like you had these bands that were kind of like riffing off of what was popular, but I can't think of a band, at least one that got popular, that tried to copy the sound of Def Leppard successfully. So, Mutt Lange, he married Shania Twain and produced her stuff. So, and it doesn't sound like Def Leppard. Whatever it was that he did with this band was a particular recipe.
Yeah,
that
and they obviously done it.
Yeah, and he was very hands-on. He was singing background vocals. I read stories where he actually said, I had to move myself away from the microphone because my vocal was coming through too hard. Yeah. So and his recording techniques, he he had them record everything to a click track. So all the guitars and everything and bass was recorded to a click track. And then they did the drums later so he could have freedom with arrangements. So he's very much a studio architect. And again, some of those producers we like Brian Wilson, that kind of builds songs. But Mutt Lange, it seems, really just kind of took the band and just kind of really just changed it, because he did work on High and Dry, right, Rob? He produced them there. And that album's got a little bit more of a rougher edge. But so they didn't get into this, whatever they got into on Pyromania in the album before. The album before has got a little bit more of a standard. You'd probably like it. A little more textures. Yeah, a little more textures, standard rock feel. It's a little more open. This just had what I think about it too is, the way this is produced. It's produced almost like it's a rock concert. It's like all the songs are made for like arenas anyway, right? And it almost feels like you could be like the way everything is kind of presented. It's almost like you'd be listening to it at a concert, where it's that thick sound that you get, back then.
That's a good word, thick, because
it's kind of like thick and fluffy.
To me, it's like the equivalent of like, how you can manipulate a photo, right? You can adjust the brightness, you can adjust the contrast, and turn it up so bright that the image just changes. It just bleeds into the background. And to me, this is what that album is. Like, for example, like Photograph, when Elliot hits that high note, it should be louder. It should be, should stand out forefront to me, but it kind of just blends into the overall sound of everything that's going on.
It's an equal mix.
Yeah. That vocal right there should really stand out, and that kind of. I mean, it always bothered me that it's effective, but it should be. Everybody should have their little pocket. I feel in a band like this, and especially a rock band, I feel like everybody should be heard. Everybody should have their individual like space, and I feel like everything is equal. And to me, it's not necessarily what I like, but but I who am I? I mean,
it's effective. I think that it's effective for them. You make a really good point about how you said Joe Elliott's vocals are kind of equal in the mix. Rob, do you think that's part of the pop leaning, or the kind of going for a little bit more accessible sound, so it's not as bracing as because they were considered one of the new wave of British heavy metal. So by sanding down some of those edges, it's still the hard rock is still there, the solos are still there. It's just kind of the package is a little bit more pleasant. Is that?
And I think it's interesting that the last, or not the last, but one of the podcasts I was on with you about Appetite and Destruction. For Destruction, I see this as the total opposite side of the spectrum. That album sounds like they went into the studio, played it once, and then threw their instruments on the ground and said, "Press it." We're done. Whereas Pyromania sounds like they spent, like 100 takes on every guitar solo and vocal thing, and it just sounds like they recorded it until it was more than perfect for what they wanted. And it loses, as Eric was saying, that raw side to it. And the songs are good, but it's a little too polished.
I think you get something else. I'll kick it back to you, Eric. But I think as a result, I think you get something different. And I think that's what happened.
Yeah.
Is by kind of swinging the pendulum all the way over, you end up with this very, it could sound very compressed or polished or very even. But like I said, it doesn't sound like anything else. So it squarely became recognizable as Def Leppard. When you hear that those kind of call and response, like background vocals that are very like whispery or whatever it is, it's undeniable.
No, I agree. And it is a very, and I guess it has that going for it, I suppose, but that's the problem I have with rock in general in the 80s. With the 80s, those tools of the day and that processed sound, to me, rock and roll should be like harder edge. And when grunge came into the picture, and I know we've talked about this many times, the soundscape just completely changed almost overnight. the 90s hit, and it was just boom. We went back to that more analog, punch that rock used to have in the 70s. And to be fair, I mean, the 70s was very lush with their production sense back then. You think of, some of the stuff that Zeppelin was doing in the later years and, that kind of thing. But it was just, but it still had that raw energy to it, and I just like Rob said, I think, the term to me is that it's an album that is overproduced. It's in that vein of just, but they seem to have dug it. It's like the artist of the day. They probably thought, yeah, this is unique. And maybe you're right. That's probably the case.
Yeah. Cause I think the proof is in the pudding though. The grooves are there. This album rocks hard,
Yeah.
And that's the maybe the anomaly is you wouldn't expect something to be as well produced or overproduced or however you mega produced, however you want to slice it. To still be this good though, like this could have been like a train wreck if it's so overproduced that it's like, oh, it's too sweet,
Yeah.
I think it's enough. I think it's enough in there that you could tell it's they're making a statement and here's a particular sound. But the material they brought wasn't, that was the material they were working on anyway. So they still had all this like Rock of Ages. I mean, Jesus Christ, that's probably one of the best arena songs, probably one of the best rock songs ever.
Mm-hmm.
So they, the material was up to, the material could withstand the manipulations that it went through. Let me put it to you that way. Mm-hmm. Maybe in a different band or a lesser band, it might have sounded like a holy mess. But I think that the rock music was still there, was there, and that they brought, and then it was kind of like, okay, we're gonna kind of do stuff with it. So it gave it that wall of sound and that particular bass sound that you got from Rick Savage. But the material was strong enough, I think, to hold up to it, which is why this sold 10 million, right? Because we're not talking about it. We're kind of going in a little hard on it, but don't forget this album sold a ton of copies, and there was something about it that made it maybe a little bit more radio friendly, and maybe that production style makes it easier so you don't have Joe Elliott wailing at the top of his lungs on the by kind of evening it out. It makes it a little bit more appealing, but there's still those hard rock edges, right, Robert? I mean,
there are. And I agree with you. I don't want to, put down the album. It's an absolutely great album. And I'm curious, I would have loved to have been the fly on the wall and seen if there was a point when the band sat down with Mutt and he said, do you want to make High and Dry #2 and continue on your path? Yeah. Or do you want to be a little more commercial and become multi-millionaires each playing arenas in the next day? And they had to make a decision, and even a bigger decision when it came to Hysteria and Adrenalize, because the songs get even more watered down.
Yeah, that really goes. Yeah, that's what I was saying when I said lean into it. That's what I meant. Hysteria was just,
and that's where I want to, another artist which just comes to mind. Who's the biggest thing on the planet? Taylor Swift was a country artist. And made a very conscious decision to go and be pop country and then just become a pop artist. Mm-hmm. And look at her now. Do you think she regrets it?
No.
Her bank account doesn't.
I don't think Def Leppard regrets it at all because, this was a short-lived relationship. They did Hysteria. He originally wasn't available, but they took so long to get to it that he eventually was. And then he worked on Adrenalize. And then they kind of parted ways for a while. And if you listen to their stuff in the 90s, it sounds decidedly different.
So it's not like to go grunge.
Yeah, well, everybody did. But it's not like they tried to get a producer in that would replicate that Mutt Lange sound. So that became a particular that sound became particular to the producer. And that's kind of what we were getting at is the influence of the producer. It's not like they took those tools forward and said, well, we're just going to go this way. They once they stopped working with him, it kind of, things kind of died down, probably more palatable to Eric. If you listen to some of their later stuff, it was kind of straight ahead rock. But then when I'm listening to it, I'm like, Like, where's the Def Leppard? Like, where's Def Leppard in this album, right? Because that sound and that production sound became so identifiable, and because of this album, rock till you drop. I mean, this album is like hit after hit. We can't really dismiss the impact.
Let me throw another name into the mix and let you guys talk about it. George Martin.
Yeah.
I mean, he added so much to the Beatles. And yes, they wrote great songs, but every little thing above the raw songs was pretty much his input. I just found out my whole life has been a lie a few months ago that in my favorite Beatles song in my life, that the harpsichord solo is a piano.
Really?
It's a piano solo played at double speed.
Oh,
yes!
Wow,
look that up on YouTube, and
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
See, now here's the difference though with the Beatles. George Martin kind of gave them license to fool around and experiment, and it seems like Mutt Lange is like I'm the coach. I'm the lead. I'm going to be the coach. I'm going to, you guys got to follow my lead because, everything I've read is he's very demanding. He's very much a perfectionist. Wants things a certain way, and you hear it on this album. Like Eric said, it almost sounds too perfect, like everything fits. But
I can lead you guys into the end zone if you want to follow me. It's your choice.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And they made the choice, so that's great for them.
Yeah, no, I think that this album
it definitely paid off for them. I mean, yeah. But I think this album is like Dean was saying. It does usher in a very particular. You're almost, I'm surprised they weren't selling like tickets with the sale of this album because it almost feels like this is like your pass of what a Def Leppard show could sound like live. Yeah, in a sense, like this is that circular sort of really, arena type sound where you're getting that even sonic approach. And that, and I guess, if you really kind of spend a lot of time analyzing that and getting into that, I suppose it is a really well produced album in that way. I just don't care for especially when it comes to rock and roll, if something like the Beatles, it was far more experimental and you're creating all kinds of different sounds and textures and things like that. But to throw it into a mix that is completely even, there's sort of a dull edge to that. There's like, how do you pinpoint what is what and that kind of thing. I like hearing a full immersive, like you put headphones on, and if I listen to this album with headphones, I'm going to get just a wall. I'm going to get like a sonic, like a curtain.
Almost like a mono recording.
Well, I'm going to get a veil over what could be a better sounding record to me, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
Because you're getting that sort of like, it's like somebody wearing like a veil over their face or something, and you're not getting the real low ends and the deal that, these guys could be doing. But, they could have doctored it up. They could have been a little bit more experimental with their stuff too. I just don't think that he wanted to do that, Mutt Lange. He just wanted to make a really great sounding,
rock
album in that way.
I got a question for you too that I thought of today when I was listening to this album. Photograph, right before the riff kicks in, starts off with just that one note, like hitting a string or something. Mm-hmm. Anybody see any familiarity to A Hard Day's Night by the Beatles? How it starts with that strum before the song kicks in?
There you go.
Yeah, maybe.
And they took a little of the Who with "Foolin'" because they, is squarely from my generation.
Yeah.
You know what, Eric? I want to just jump back to something you were saying about Beatles experimenting. If we put ourselves back in 1983, this was highly experimental for them then, right? This was going out and doing something different, right? This was them,
true.
Two albums in, trying something different and saying, okay, well, yeah, we, the sound we've got is okay, but what else is there? So from an experimental, from that standpoint, they were certainly experimenting with it, right? They were doing something that was not that was not heard from them before. It just happened to work. So then they just they really like, you know, turned it up to 11. They, you know, for Hysteria, they really like, it became almost, you almost like get lost in the sauce of the production. But this one, I think is close. I think this one's close enough. You know, I think it's, if you compare and contrast this one with Hysteria, you know, this one's,
it's
going to be a little, it's going to be a little bit, it's going to be a little harder edge. It's going to be the harder edged of the two. I think there's enough. There's, like I said, in the grooves, the songs that you've got, you know, Stage Fright and Foolin', Rock of Ages, you know,
I mean,
you know, there's so, you know, they didn't trade in. They traded in a way of making the records, but they didn't trade in the type of music they were making. If that makes sense, right? They didn't sell out and say, well, we want to make pop music. They were making the same type of music. It was just presented in a different way.
And there's something with a lot of bands where you can't win either way. If you write the same album every time, people are, you know, like, hey, you know, you got to grow or you have to change.
Yeah.
And then if you change too much and start doing classical or jazz or something, you lose a big part of your fan base.
Yeah, it's a fickle, very fickle.
At least they are kind of moving, and it was great.
I don't knock the attempt. I don't knock the, you know, like Dean was saying, you know, you could consider it just to, you know, just come up with a very particular sound. They've achieved that. It's just not a sound that I'm overly fond of. That's just my opinion, though. It's just, you know, I'm sure a lot, 10 million strong. I mean, it's a lot of people disagree with, you know, I don't know if that is, you know, audiophiles out there would. I mean, I didn't really look this up or do any kind of research on that, but I'm curious to know what other producers and engineers actually think of the sound of this album. Be interesting to dive into at some point. Maybe I should.
Somebody asked Angus Young once, "What's it like to make 13 albums that are all exactly the same?"
Yeah,
and he sat back and he said, "You know something? That's really insulting for you to tell me. We've made 14 albums that sound exactly the same."
See that?
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
But they've gotten paid off for making the same album 14 times.
Yeah.
There are two ways to approach it.
Yeah, but, and Hysteria sold 12 million copies. So, you know, it worked and it paid off, right? So they not only did they replicate the formula, but they replicated it 2 million more. Eric, do you know who plays keyboards on Rock of Ages?
No. Who plays keyboards on Rock of Ages?
He blinded us with science.
Ah, Mr. Dolby.
Thomas Dolby makes an appearance on this album.
That's amazing.
And, Tony Kaye from Yes also plays some keyboards.
On
this album. So he was, and Thomas Dolby was on Rock of Ages.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a little bit of some prog pedigree in there for the prog fans. You got Tony Kaye in there. Like Robert said, these guys were formed in 1976. So, and Joe Elliott he was just 18. Rick Allen, when he joined, was 15 when he joined Def Leppard, and that was after they sacked, you know, the first drummer. So these guys were kind of young and hungry and you know, kind of getting things done out there. But like I said, squarely of the 80s, their EP came out in 79. Their first album came out in 80, second one, 81. So this group is, even though they were formed in 76, for whatever that means, they're squarely a creature of the 80s. And I think they kind of heralded, you know, in 83, there was not a whole lot going on with rock. There was a lot of metal stuff going on. You had Dio having albums out, and Bark at the Moon was out by Ozzy. You know, you had Slayer. You did have metal, but this crossover, you know, was something unique. There wasn't like a lot of rock groups, especially rock groups that had their pedigree from the 80s. You know, you still had the holdovers. You had Robert Plant, Principle of Moments. You had that, but I think Def Leppard is kind of like one of the first rock superstar acts of the 80s. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah,
that's very fair to say.
Yeah.
You had groups like Poison, Motley Crue coming into. I mean, do you guys consider? I mean, Rob, I'll ask you this question: would you guys hair metal? Yes. I mean, is hair bands? Is there a difference? Do you consider hair bands metal, true metal? Because there were a lot of like
Yes,
sort of this kitschy kind of stuff happening, which, you know, to be completely fair, I was honest, I never kind of dialed into that scene. And
although they get a bad rap, when you dissect them, they usually have very good instrumentalists. The guitarists are usually amazing and don't always get the pull-out credit that somebody like Nuno gets.
Vito Bratta.
Yeah. He was
That's a pop quiz for Rob. Vito Bratta. Who's he the guitar
White
player
Lion.
for? White Lion. Nice.
Yeah.
You didn't know. I knew that.
If I can just hop onto the songs on this album.
Yeah, let's do that.
In listening to it really closely, I can honestly say that there are 4 great songs on it, which are the 4 singles. And the more I listen to it, the rest of the songs pretty much sound like filler. I think Rock definitely has its own space above that, but I think a lot of the other songs, Die Hard the Hunter, Billy's Got a Gun, just sound like we've got our hits already. Let's just write something to fill the space. I just can't imagine those songs becoming hits. It's not like an album with... some albums you listen to and they're like, oh, it's got 10 hits on it. This one sounds like it's got 4 hits and then other songs to make an album.
Well, that's the tightrope you walk on, is when you apply the same method to every song, you know, it could get a little long in the tooth, you know, and even I think even Joe Elliott said, like, action, not words. He goes, you know what? That's a backwater song. He goes, there's a reason why it's on the second side towards the end. So they even knew, like, kind of, you know, that they were really trying to stack the deck with side one. Although, like I said, I'm going to go with like Rock of Ages and Foolin'. I'm not sure you're going to see a better 1-2 punch on an album of Foolin' than Rock of Ages. You know, I don't know. It'd be some strong competition for sequential 2 songs, especially with the gleetin', gloutin', gloutin', gloutin'.
Well, 1-2 punch. You're talking a triple header there: Foolin', Photograph, and then Rock of Ages. I mean, all 3 in succession.
I'm talking sequentially. No, it's Foolin'. Side 2 is Foolin', and then Rock of Ages.
Okay.
You've got on side 1 though. It's not that bad either. It's Rock Till You Drop, Photograph, and then Stage Fright, which is a minor hit. Stage Fright's not bad.
Yeah, it's a kicking song.
Yeah. You know,
but
yeah, like I said, you kind of, it can, by the time you get to the end of the album, you can be kind of like, okay, the next song is going to sound somewhat similar because of the production is very, like Eric is pointing out, you know, it's equally applied. It seems like everything is equally applied across each song. The good news is if it works, it's really great. It's a great thing.
Yeah.
But like Rob was saying, it kind of could wear out its welcome then for songs that maybe weren't as strong, maybe could have benefited from something different, right? As opposed to the one size fits all approach that he took here. Like I said, though, he was right. Mutt Lange was correct enough that it sold 10 million copies. So you got to go with the guy. He was onto something when he was doing it. I don't know if he was on. I didn't say he was on something, though he might. No, he's not. He's actually famously not a drinker, and doesn't partake in any of that. No, honestly, but so he was on. He was definitely on to something.
Well, I think he knew what he was making. I think he knew that it would appeal to a mass audience. They knew, you know. I don't think that this is an album where, you know, you have a bunch of like sort of perfectionist sort of engineer audiophile saying, oh, this is, you know, one of the greatest sounding albums ever. It's going to be, you know, it's a rock and roll album. It's a great sounding rock and roll album for those who, you know, really don't really care about that kind of thing. If, you know, who are really delving in and on how an album sounds and the sort of the details that go into it, you know, it sounds good enough to have sold, you know, the amount of copies it sold. And again, you know, I see it as, like I said, a gateway to a lot of shows being sold out, and people going to the shows, and this is that kind of music, that kind of forum. It's
so I wonder if on a parallel timeline, what we would think if this was their first album, and we didn't know they're like much harder.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And it was just like a Boston's first album. Or
then that might be something that's a whole other discussion right there.
Yeah. I think in the 80s, you might have thought it was more of a gimmick then. It's like, if they came out like this, you'd think, this is kind of light, but without having that hard rock pedigree behind them, and then making the choice, because we're able to listen to those two other albums and kind of track it and say, okay, well, now here's where, they did something different, kind of like the Cult when they kind of did their 180. You can kind of listen to their roots beforehand and say, okay, well, here's where they were. And then all of a sudden it's something different. And that was also the benefit of a new producer. Here's something interesting. The album after the next project that Mutt Lange worked on was Heartbeat City by the Cars. Now think of the song Hello Again and how it begins. If you're familiar, if you remember Hello Again, it's like, hello.
Yeah.
It's got like that Def Leppard-ish.
Like Joe Elliott, yeah.
It's got that Leppard-ish, like their backing vocal kind of stylings to it. But Heartbeat City, you listen to the song Drive, that sounds nothing like Def Leppard, right?
Yeah.
So he, again, you can kind of look at Mutt Lange and just see the different work that he's done. And this is something particular to this band. So I just want to make sure that, anybody that's listening kind of, if you want to go and look at his discography, he's worked with a lot of different people, but this was something, like I said, AC/DC, you couldn't be more bare bones and stripped down than that. And that was Back in Black. And he did, what is it? For Those About to Rock or Highway to Hell. Yep. He did one of the other ones. So this was probably a band looking for something specific that he delivered. And he said, well, I need to kind of guide you through it.
Yeah.
Let me, take the reins over and show you how it's done.
I think at this point too, it's already the technology too. You got to consider mixing boards were different. The old Neve consoles were not, they weren't as prominent. I don't think in the 80s you started having more, everything was sort of slowly turning into the digital thing. And it was a totally different, but exciting, I suppose at the time. And everybody was jumping into that pool. I mean, everybody was excited about a brand new technology coming out. We're going to do this. So, I mean, I get it. I mean, it's definitely, I feel like it was already happening. And this was his opportunity to kind of make something that was unique. Like you said,
I think it's comfort food. When you listen to a Def Leppard song, cause you know what you're going to get from it and you know what it's going to sound like. I think there's something comforting in that as well, though. I like being able to listen to these types of songs and even Pour Some Sugar on Me and Armageddon It from Hysteria.
Yeah,
you kind of understand. They're kind of in their zone and they do it really well. And that's part of the thing. I don't want to kind of diminish Def Leppard as a band.
I'm not saying that at all. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that at all. I have very fond memories of hearing these songs being played at the time, and it brings back a lot of great memories, of us growing up and, cruising along or, whatever, wherever it was playing, it was, it was on the scene, it was on the soundscape. Yeah. So, I mean, it is definitely part of that soundtrack. It felt
good when one of the songs came on.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And for whatever experience you might've been having on a date or, whatever, the songs have that appeal no matter what was going on in your life at the time. It made you feel good.
I met some friends that I'm still good friends with because of Def Leppard.
Mm-hmm. Oh, really? See that?
Yeah.
And I remember our good friend John, his sister was a diehard Joe Elliott. She was nuts over the guy. So there was a lot of that too, like the experience of her being a really diehard fan and just having those conversations. I used to work with her. And just, she was nuts over the guy. So there's a little bit of that, as well. I mean, the guy was a good looking guy. He was, he's definitely the sex symbol, one of the great sex symbols of the 80s too. And he was a great front man. And
where does he fit? Where does he fit in for rock vocalists, Joe Elliott? He's got I listened to this album like 5 times. probably more than I ever did previous. He's got a really, especially back then, I mean, he's got a really strong voice, but I'm not sure he gets the due, Rob. What do you think? Because because of the way the songs are produced, he's not able to like Steve Perry it and kind of be front and center and really kind of lay it out there. Does the production of these albums do him some injustice because you don't really get to see how powerful he is?
On par with the hard rock singers of the time.
Uh-huh.
I don't really consider him that far above or anything. Def Leppard did something very interesting a few years ago as part of their Las Vegas residency. For a few nights, they opened their own show as a band called Dead Flatbird, who was the ultimate Def Leppard tribute band. And they played all stuff off the first 3 albums.
Oh, really?
And they were, if you search it on YouTube, it's like a real rock and roll show. And they claimed they were the best Def Leppard cover band out there. And
it was them.
And it was them. And I was like, So they still do have a feeling for those old, rockers.
Yeah.
Interesting. We've got an ELO connection. Anybody know what the ELO connection is between Def Leppard and ELO? Rob might. I don't know, because you're kind of a Def Leppard fan.
Bevan played with Black Sabbath, who toured once with Def Leppard. I don't know.
No, it's a little bit more direct than that. Def Leppard put out an album of covers called Yeah in the mid-90s. And they covered 10538 Overture. It was one of their favorite songs. They selected songs from their youth that they liked, and 10538 Overture by Electric Light Orchestra was covered on that album. So interesting, right? See?
I did not know that.
Even Velvet Revolver laid at the altar of ELO, and they did a cover of Can't Get It Out of My Head. So they all bow before ELO, Rob.
Even Ace Frehley did a ELO cover. Yeah.
So, put that in your pipe and smoke it. All right. Things I like. The striking match at the end of Rock of Ages. If you listen at the very end, because the song talks about Pyromania, talks about that stuff, and at the very end, you hear like the striking of a match. I think that's kind of a neat little. There's a lot of little gems on this album. You got, you do have to listen to it like this. For what Eric was saying, you really got to listen to this album to kind of get what you're going to want to get out of it. It can be difficult, and I did spend one of the listening specifically trying to listen to Joe Elliott, right? And it could be a little bit of a task because of the way it's mixed. And I get where, and that's where Eric's, frustrations comes in is, you like that separation of things, but this is a bombastic sound is really what it is. It's an arena rock style sound that was put on vinyl, that kind of, that big pushing forward in your face kind of, but all equal, like you said, like the mix you'd hear at a concert where everything's kind of mixed kind of equally. You don't really hear too much that you could pick out. But I think, like I said, for this album and this music, it works.
And it came out at the perfect time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was a lull. There was a lull in 83.
Exactly. And it was totally accepted as being an arena rock album. If it came out, today, people might say it's too clean. If it came out before, it might not have worked, but it came out at just the right time and is definitely something you need to go back and listen to if you haven't in a while.
Yeah, I think it deserves it because in 83, you had the likes of Sports by Huey Lewis and the News, Color by Numbers by Culture Club. So again, the 80s new wave was starting to take hold. But you still had, like I said, you had Bark at the Moon. You had Eliminator by ZZ Top. So there's some rock there, but like I said, Pyromania and Def Leppard were squarely from the an 80s kind of pedigree band from the get go. The Police,
and they've managed to hold on to it. They've managed to maintain the arena band status. Like so many other bands, they haven't gone down
just
to
grinding it out.
I
mean, that's I think the Def Leppard story is even in those lean times in the 90s when they did try and kind of sound grungy and no one was buying it. they just soldiered on. Like they didn't stop releasing material. They didn't stop touring. And now, they're still out there, and they're very much a venerated band. I forgot to look. Did they get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? I think they did, right?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, 2019.
Alrighty then.
Yeah, Brian May inducted them, so that's high praise too.
All right. Well, if you listen to the deluxe edition of Pyromania, which has a live concert on the extra disc from 1983, Brian May comes out and plays a long medley with them at the end.
Ah, see?
So they are good friends with Brian May.
That's high praise. From he's like the professor of rock and roll, Brian May, or the astrophysicist of rock and roll.
The song in question is Traveling Band by John Fogerty.
Wow. CCR, huh?
It features Brian May, so that's interesting.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it has rock and roll by Zeppelin mixed in. It's a whole.
Yeah, they're rock and rollers at heart. And I think that's that's the key. The super slick backing vocals. Again, squarely their own. You're not going to see that anywhere else. Top tracks. So Rob, you're going to go with just the hits? I mean, there's nothing. I'll
definitely stick rock. I mean, I liked the whole album. This album, to me, I could listen to from beginning to end and not get bored.
Yeah.
Okay. And it was interesting, when you invited me to be on this and I picked it out of Spotify and started listening to it some more, I still knew every single lyric on the whole album.
Yeah.
And
you didn't go into the closet and get the Union Jack shirt. I know you still have it. You didn't do that, did you? You did. You did, you dirty dog.
Yeah.
I knew
cut them down to Union Jack underwear now. So.
TMI. Yeah, this one's an eternal. I think this is Rock 101. I think to understand rock in the 80s, I think you need to listen to this album. I think it is emblematic of a certain, like you said, a certain time in the 80s and a certain sound. And
it's a cornerstone.
And it's not Cornerstone by Styx, but it is a cornerstone album.
Yes.
And it's definitely one to listen to. I like I said, I'm going to go with like Foolin' and Rock of Ages. I think for me, that's a 1-2 punch, even though it's deeper into the album. And the first side is no slouch. If you grew up during this time and you listen, even some of the lesser known songs, I'm like, wait, I remember hearing that at some point on the radio. Mm-hmm. So this was one of those albums that, that like NEW or the rock stations were kind of picking out the album tracks from. Like Eric likes to mention, they go a little deeper on like the rock stations. Yeah. So I remember when I was listening to this, I'm like, I think I remember hearing this elsewhere.
And they did get a lot of flack on the album's cover.
Because of the crosshairs?
The crosshairs and the building and the explosion, the whole thing got the flack from the PMRC and all that kind of stuff.
So they went with some weird face for Hysteria. Just to wrap up, and they also, I remember at the time when this came out, it came out in 83, and then they kind of dropped off the map. Like once this had run its course, I distinctly remember thinking, I'm like, when Hysteria came out in 87, I'm like, who's going to want to listen to this? Because this was during an era when bands still put out albums like if you look, they put out an album in 80, 81, and 83. Mm-hmm. And that was still the kind of the way things went back then, is you kind of put out an album every year or every other year.
Unless you're Boston.
Unless you're Boston. And they even had the same dilemma. 4 years later, by then music had changed, right? We had seen like the British new wave invasion kind of come in. And these guys come in 87 with an album that is, like we said, leans in further, and it sold even more. I don't get it was a weird thing. Usually when you've got a big album, you want to get another one out, right? Kind of capitalize on it. They took 4 years with Mutt Lange and put it out, and it was even bigger. Pour Some Sugar on Me, and Love Bites, and Rocket, Women, Armageddon. I mean, it was the same type of thing they were able to replicate. After this one, though, right? Adrenalize didn't really do nearly as much after this.
And I think that is the ongoing debate of which album is better. what's the preferred for us? I think it would be this album because we were huge fans. Like early '80s was still that was our coming of age time. I think. Somebody like Andrew that has been on the cast for quite a few episodes. He's a fan of Def Leppard as well, and I know his choice would have been Hysteria for sure.
Yeah,
that's an album that was near and dear to his heart. So, but yeah. So it's interesting that there's that still. I think to this day there's still that interplay, and I think it because of the fan base too. Yeah, might be the reason why Hysteria was such a hit because they wanted that follow up, and boy, they follow up.
Yeah,
and the sound and just it just this album
it was even bigger. It was even more. Like I said, they really kind of laid it, really poured sugar on it to not make too much of a pun, but they really did. The sound was sweeter. It was even bigger. They leaned into those kind of Def Leppard backing vocals even more. Mm-hmm. Of final note, right, not too long after this came out in '83. I think in '84 is when the drummer Rick Allen flipped his car, had an accident, and they lost his arm. He lost his left arm. Actually, I didn't know this though. They had actually reattached his arm, but it got infected. Really? Yeah, they actually did reattach it, but it got infected, so they had to remove it. So he. There was never any intention of not using another drummer. He said, we'll get this figured out. He goes, technology is now at the point where we can kind of do something. And, he's got all these pedals with his feet that he triggers. And I think when they first went out on tour after the accident, they brought like a secondary drummer to kind of supplement him just in case.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah.
The first show, he was like, I don't need him.
Yeah, the drummer was late or missed the show, and they're like, and Rick Allen played the show. Like, we don't really need you. We don't really need the guy. He's got it. It was never, and there was never a doubt. So, a one-armed drummer, who would have thought? But by using the electronics, technology, and enhanced foot pedals, he's been a stalwart part of Def Leppard, and they've soldiered on. Again, through the passing of Steve Clark, he would pass away after Hysteria.
And that was a big hit to them because if you read up, it says that Steve Clark wrote like 90% of the material.
Yeah. Prolific songwriter for them.
Of albums. So the fact that they lost him is amazing that they managed to have more hits and keep it going.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, Vivian Campbell kind of came in after that. He's was late of Whitesnake and a couple other bands, right? He made the round, the metal
Dio.
rounds, right? Dio, also. So he certainly wasn't the last in line, Rob, was he?
Ooh,
get it?
No, he was not.
I got a million of them, Eric. And
I know.
We're only at 100,000, so you've got 900,000 more to wade through with me, Eric. So. You thought I was on the tail end. We're just getting started, my friend. So I think that's going to do it. All in all, we did get a little in the weeds with the production thing, but that was an important part of this story to kind of hopefully give a little bit more of behind the music. That make no mistake, this is a fantastic album. It is a great album. The sales alone dictate that, but listening to it, I listened to it multiple times and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the nostalgia of it, but then I also enjoyed kind of appreciating Def Leppard for this. Like I said, despite the way that this album was produced, the music is good, and the music is the music, and that in the end, that's the key. We can forgive, you can forgive bad production, but if the music is shitty, there's nothing no producer can help that.
And I wouldn't call it bad production. I wouldn't call it bad. I would just call it clean,
different. Something different.
Yes.
But again, it's squarely their own. So, and that's the quote unquote Def Leppard sound. So, listen to Pyromania. It is on Spotify in the regular edition, which I listened to. Rob listened to the extended edition with all the extra stuff and the live stuff. And Eric just didn't listen to it at all. He just said, you know what? The hell.
No, I did. I actually did. I just did today. Yeah.
He pulled out the cassette.
Unless Wilco does Def Leppard songs,
the dusty cassette. No, just fun with you. But absolutely check this album out. It's a great one. Rob Prisament, thank you so much for joining us again, my friend.
Thank you for inviting me. guys.
We'll get
Always
you on
great to
again.
see you.
Yeah. He brings to bear his full knowledge, and I love when he's on because he's got great stories and he's got great knowledge and he's got great insight. So it's always fun to have Rob on.
Opinions, very strong opinions.
And we agree with them, and that's why you can keep coming back.
Oh, okay.
Hey, he said that. I didn't.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Find us on Instagram and Facebook and give us follows there. We've got a lot of great people posting. Rob posts there too. He posts, he'll post some stuff that he likes, some fun stuff. Erica is posting on there as well. I'm posting on there, plus the whole other community of people that we have, almost 500 people in our community. That really, if you like this kind of material and music and movies of this era and of this ilk, go find us on Instagram and Facebook. You'll have a great time. I think it's a wonderful addition to your feed if you're scrolling through when you're doing it in the morning or whenever you are. It's a great bunch of people. So go ahead and do that, won't you? It's just 3324 podcast. You can find us there. So,
Dean, as a present for people that made it through the entire episode.
Was just winding down. Go ahead.
Would you like to tell them what 3324 stands for those who made it through? No, okay.
You don't get anything. You get nothing.
What's that from? I forgot. Oh, Willy Wonka.
Willy Wonka. You get nothing. Good day, sir. I said good day. We'll save it. We'll save it for another episode. We'll save it for the next episode you're on. This way when people see that you're going to be on the episode, like, oh, well, that should be the one where I find out.
There you go.
You see? So we just laid an Easter egg. This is like a post-credit scene.
Yes.
For the next episode that Rob is going to be on, and hopefully it won't be too far away. But so for Rob, for Eric, this has been Dean.
Hi guys.
Chef's kiss, and we will catch you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.